She looked harmless until the Deathworld predator inside her finally woke up. The pod hit the debris field at 6 kilometers per second, and I had exactly 4 seconds to decide whether to die with it or get out. I chose to get out. My name is Cale Griffith. I am a xenobiologist aboard the Galactic Union research vessel Saranath, and I am the only human on a crew of 14. That fact alone should tell you everything about how the universe sees my species. We are the newcomers, the soft ones, the fragile little mammals who somehow stumbled into space travel 3 centuries after everyone else already had it figured out. The aliens who crew this ship treat me the way you would treat a stray cat that wandered into a laboratory. They find me curious. They find me harmless. They give me space to exist and very little else. I have been aboard the Saranath for 2 standard years. In that time, I have cataloged 47 previously uncontacted star systems, translated 3 new forms of bacterial communication, and survived 4 separate incidents that nearly ended my life. The crew noted each one with mild interest, and then went back to their work. Humans are apparently very good at not dying, they observed, but in a tone that suggested this was more of an inconvenience than an achievement. The debris field we entered that morning was tagged as Hazard Class 2 on the navigation charts. Routine. Vreth, our captain, and a Kalehari, with 7 long limbs that folded like origami when she sat, had ordered a reduced-speed survey sweep. The Kalehari are one of the oldest spacefaring species in the Union. They have seen everything. Nothing surprises them anymore. That is both their greatest strength and the reason they almost missed what I found. I was running passive scans in the secondary observation deck when the signal came through. It was faint, buried under the electromagnetic noise of 100 tons of fractured metal drifting in slow rotation around a dead star. Most scanning systems would not have caught it. Ours almost did not, but I had spent the last 6 months fine-tuning my station's sensitivity arrays to detect biological heat signatures, because I had a theory that microbial life persisted in the cold spaces between debris clusters, and I had been running that particular scan every morning for the last 90 days. The signal was not microbial. It was a heartbeat. I ran it again, then a 3rd time. I cross-referenced the frequency against the Union's biological database. It came back with a single match. Species designation, human. Confidence level, 94%. I reported it immediately to the bridge. Vreth did not look up from her navigation display. Sivith, our Velhari navigator, made a low clicking sound that I had learned to interpret as dismissal. The 3rd bridge officer, a pale and slow-moving Drenthi named Aulos, turned one of his 4 eyes toward my report, and then turned it back. Debris field interference, Sivith said. Your equipment has been showing false positives for weeks, Griffith. It hasn't, I said. I recalibrated yesterday. Human recalibration, Sivith said, and a few of the others made sounds that passed for amusement among their species. I stood at the entrance to the bridge for a moment. The signal was still pulsing on my tablet. Slow, irregular, getting weaker. Whatever was out there was running out of time, and the people around me were content to let it. I went back to my station, filed the scan data as a formal incident report in the ship's log, and then did something that was technically against crew protocol. I signed out the auxiliary survey pod under a debris collection notation and took it into the field myself. The Saranath's auxiliary pod was a small, 1-person vessel designed for close-range sample collection. It was not designed for navigating active debris fields at speed. I navigated it through an active debris field at speed. Twice, rotating metal panels the size of shipping containers passed close enough that I could see the scoring on their surfaces. Once, a chunk of hull plating came from below so fast I barely had time to push the pod into a vertical roll to avoid it. I found the source of the signal 17 minutes after I launched. It was a suit. A human-rated deep environment suit, the kind issued to long-range independent operatives, rather than standard crew. It was badly damaged. The left side was cracked along a seam from the shoulder down to the hip, and the thermal layer had failed, which meant the person inside had been surviving on body heat alone, inside a metal shell drifting through space that was, at that point, sitting at around -180 degrees. She was alive. I confirmed it with my scanner, and then I could not fully process it for a moment, because by every reasonable calculation she should not have been. I brought the pod alongside and extended the retrieval arm. Getting her through the pod's airlock was slow, careful work. She was completely still. Her face, visible through the cracked visor, was pale in a way that had nothing to do with skin tone, and everything to do with her body having redirected every remaining resource to keeping her core organs functioning. I got her inside. I got the pod turned around. I did not breathe properly until I was back inside the Saranath's docking bay with the airlock sealed behind me. The medical bay on the Saranath was state-of-the-art by Galactic Union standards, which meant it was designed for 12 different physiologies, none of which were human. I had spent my first 3 months aboard adapting one of the treatment bays for my own potential use, because the ship's medical system had initially recommended a treatment protocol for me that would have been fatal to a human and entirely appropriate for a Velhari. I was glad I had done that work. I got her onto the treatment surface and began assessing. Frostbite across 3 fingers of her right hand, 2nd degree on the 4th and 5th, core temperature that should have been incompatible with survival, dehydration, muscle deterioration consistent with minimal movement over a long period, a partially healed cut along her left forearm that someone had sealed with emergency bonding strips, done carefully and precisely, without any external help. She had been alone out there for a long time, long enough that the wound on her arm had healed, long enough that her body had systematically begun to shut down non-essential functions to preserve the ones that mattered, and she had kept herself alive through all of it. I pulled her identification chip from the suit's data port. Her name came back immediately. Mara Ellison. Beyond that, the chip was clean. No mission designation. No vessel registry. No crew assignment. No record of how she had gotten this far out into unmapped space, alone, in a suit designed for planetary terrain operations rather than deep space survival. She was a complete mystery wrapped in a damaged suit, and she was breathing, and that was enough for now. Vreth came down to the medical bay 40 minutes later. She looked at Mara the way she looked at all humans, with the polite, detached interest of someone examining an unfamiliar rock formation. "Another one," she said, not unkindly, just matter-of-factly, as if humans were the sort of thing that simply appeared in space from time to time, like static. "She needs rest," I said, "real rest, and food when she wakes up, and no one disturbing her until she is ready." "She is your concern, then," Vreth said, and turned and left. I sat with Mara for the next 6 hours. The ship's systems monitored her vitals, and slowly, degree by degree, her core temperature came up. The frostbite on her fingers would leave some scarring. Everything else, the medical bay's projections said, would recover. I watched the color come back into her face. I watched her breathing even out from the shallow, rationed breaths of someone conserving oxygen to the deeper, slower rhythm of genuine sleep. I did not know yet who she was. I did not know what had happened to her, or how she had ended up alone in a debris field on the edge of unmapped space, or what she was capable of. But I remember the moment I first really looked at her, and felt something I could not name, not worry exactly, not the simple concern of one human for another, something quieter and more specific than that. I looked at a woman who had survived something that should have been unsurvivable, alone, in the dark, for an unknown length of time, and had kept herself organized enough to seal her own wound cleanly. I looked at her and I felt, for the first time in 2 years aboard this ship, like I was not the only dangerous thing in the room. I did not understand that feeling yet. I would. She woke up at 30:40 ship time, and I know that because I was still at my workstation in the corner of the medical bay when her eyes opened. Most people, when they wake up in an unfamiliar place, go through a sequence: confusion, disorientation, fear, sometimes. They look around trying to understand where they are, and how they got there, and whether they are safe. It takes a few seconds, sometimes longer. Mara Ellison did none of that. Her eyes opened and they were already focused. Not on me, on the room. She did a slow, thorough sweep of the space, taking in the exits, The equipment, the dimensions, the single window viewport on the far wall, the door to my left, the ventilation panel above the second treatment bay. All of it in about 4 seconds. Then she looked at me. "You pulled me in," she said. Her voice was rough with dehydration, but entirely steady. "Yes," I said. "How do you feel?" She sat up. Not slowly. Not with the careful movements of someone testing whether their body still worked. She just sat up, swung her legs to the side, and put her feet on the floor. She looked at her right hand, at the bandaging on her fingers, and flexed them once to test the range of movement. Then she nodded to herself, very slightly, as if confirming something. "How long was I out there?" she asked. "I don't know exactly," I said. "The debris field's electromagnetic interference makes it hard to trace a drift path. Based on your physical condition, the medical system estimated between 18 and 22 days. She was quiet for a moment. 20 days, she said. Not a question. More like she was just confirming a number she had already worked out herself. "There's food," I said, and pointed to the tray I had prepared. Standard human nutrition. Nothing complicated. The kind of food that was easy on a stomach, that had been running on near empty. She looked at it, looked at me, then sat down on the edge of the treatment bay and began eating. Slowly, precisely, without rush. Like eating was a task to be completed efficiently, rather than something that required any particular feeling attached to it. "What ship is this?" she asked between bites. "Galactic Union research vessel Saranath," I said. "I'm Cale Griffith, xenobiologist. You're the only other human on board. Who's in command?" "Vreth, Cale Hari. 7-limbed, hard to miss. She's not unfriendly, but don't expect warmth." Mara nodded, still eating. "How many crew total?" 14, including the 2 of us. "What systems are we in?" I told her the coordinates. She went still for just a moment. Then she resumed eating. "Okay," she said. I watched her and I tried to figure out what I was seeing. She was not performing calm. She was not holding herself together through effort. She was simply calm. The way a person is calm when they have decided, at some point in the past, that panic is not a useful tool, and have not reached for it since. "Your identification chip didn't have a mission designation," I said carefully, "or a vessel registry. You don't have to tell me anything, but if there's someone we should contact." "There isn't," she said. "Not right now." I accepted that. I have learned, in 2 years of working alongside alien species who communicate in 17 different ways, that when someone tells you what they need and what they don't, you believe them. She slept again after she finished eating. Properly this time, not the unconscious shutdown her body had forced on her in the field. She slept for 8 hours in a straight line, and when she woke up, she asked for more food, and then asked where the ship's cargo bay was. I showed her. It was large and mostly empty on this leg of the survey run. High ceilings, wide floor space, storage racks along the walls. She looked at it for a moment, nodded once and said, "I'll use this in the mornings, for training." "All right," I said. And that was it. The first few days after her recovery were quiet ones. The alien crew observed her the way they had observed me when I first came aboard. Mara was an interesting specimen. She ate in the crew common area and said very little. She moved through the ship with a kind of economy that I found myself watching, not because it was dramatic, but because it was precise. She never took a path through a corridor that put her back to a door. She always sat where she could see the room. She always knew, in any space she entered, exactly where she was in relation to the exits. None of the alien crew seemed to notice. To them, she was just another soft thing. On the 3rd morning, I got up at 0300 because I could not sleep, and I went to the cargo bay because I had left a sample case there the previous afternoon. The lights were already on. Mara was in the center of the floor, moving through a sequence of motions that I recognized from the description, if not the direct experience. It was a hand-to-hand combat form, but not the kind you see in training hollows. It was slower, more deliberate. Every movement controlled completely, Every position held for a full breath before transitioning to the next. It looked almost meditative. But I noticed that every single position she moved through was a functional one. Nothing decorative. Nothing that existed only because it looked good. Every stance was the correct starting point for something. She did not stop when she saw me. She finished the form she was on, which took another 6 minutes, and then she stood straight and reached for the water bottle sitting on a crate nearby. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. "No," I said. She drank. "You've been watching me since I woke up," she said. Not an accusation, just a statement of fact. "You're interesting," I said. She almost smiled. It was a small thing, but it was there. "You're the first person who said that in a while who didn't mean it as a warning," she said. We started talking then, in the early morning quiet of the cargo bay, and I learned more about her in that hour than I had pieced together from watching her for 3 days. Her name was Mara Ellison. She had grown up in northern Canada, in a part of the country where winters were long and services were sparse, and children learned early that the environment was not going to adjust itself for their comfort. She had joined the Earth Defense Ranger program at 20, which was the youngest the program accepted applicants. The Rangers were a force that existed at the intersection of military, survival, and scientific operations. They went places standard personnel could not function in. They solved problems in environments that were actively trying to remove them from the equation. She had been doing that for 9 years. The mission that had placed her in deep space was, as she had told me on the first day, classified. She did not elaborate, and I did not push. But she told me something else. She said that at some point in a ranger's training, there is a week where the instructors take away everything, every piece of equipment, every supply, every support system. They put you in a difficult environment with nothing, and they do not check on you until the week is over. The purpose, officially, is to test survival skills. The real purpose, she said, is to answer a question. "What question?" I asked. "When everything else is gone," she said, "who are you?" She drank the last of her water and set the bottle down. "I know the answer to that question," she said. "A lot of people don't, and it terrifies them when they find out. Knowing it in advance is actually a lot more useful." Sivith, the Velhari navigator, encountered us together in the corridor later that morning. Sivith was tall and thin, with a rigid exoskeleton and 3 pairs of eyes arranged in a way that gave it a full 360 degrees of vision. It missed very little. "Two soft things," it said, looking at us both. "Perhaps if you stand close enough together, you add up to one functional crew member." Several nearby crew members made the sounds that corresponded, in their species, to laughter. I had heard variations of this for 2 years. I had developed a practiced response, which was to say nothing and wait for it to pass. Mara looked at Sivith. She did not look angry. She did not look hurt or embarrassed. She just looked at it with the same calm attention she gave everything, the way you might look at a weather system you were tracking, and she smiled. The smile was polite. It was also the least warm expression I had ever seen on a human face. It existed purely on the surface, like a word written in sand. Sivith held her gaze for a moment, then looked away first. I noticed that. I do not think Sivith did. The days that followed had a routine to them. Mara trained in the cargo bay in the early mornings. She assisted me with sample cataloging in the afternoons, because she said she needed something to keep her mind occupied and xenobiology was more interesting than she had expected. She ate. She slept in her 4-hour blocks, twice a day. She observed the crew with the same quiet attention she gave everything. And she asked me questions. Specific ones. How many ventilation access points did the ship have? What the standard emergency protocol was for the Saranath if the bridge became non-functional? What the chemical composition of the fire suppression system was, and whether it had been tested in the current atmospheric mix in the crew quarters. I answered them all. They seemed like reasonable things for a person to want to know about a ship they were now living on. On the 8th day after her recovery, I was in the observation lounge at the rear of the ship when the navigation alert sounded. Not an emergency tone. the lower, steadier tone that meant the sensors had picked up something in range that required the crew's attention. It was a distress beacon. A classic one, the simple radio frequency pulse that the Union used as a universal signal in the early days of interstellar contact, before the more sophisticated communication arrays became standard. Most ships still carried the equipment to detect it. Most ships these days did not encounter one, because anyone who was genuinely in trouble had better options. I heard Vreth's voice over the ship calm and authoritative. Distress signal detected. Origin point ahead. Preparing assessment approach. I looked at Mara. She was sitting across from me in the lounge. She had not been looking at me before the tone sounded, but when I looked at her, she was already looking at me. Her eyes were different from a moment ago. Not afraid. Not excited. Something else. A quality I had not seen in them before. Sharpened. In the way that light changes when a lens focuses it from a broad scatter into a single point. "Something's wrong with that signal," she said quietly. "You can't know that," I said. "How close to a transit corridor is this system?" she asked. I thought about it. "Fairly close," I said. "One of the main commercial routes passes about 4 light hours out." "Then why would a ship in trouble drift this far off it before transmitting?" she said. "A vessel with functional beacon capability would broadcast from the nearest high-traffic point, not this far into a survey lane that doesn't see commercial traffic." I opened my mouth to say something reasonable in response. The impact warning sounded before I could form the words. Not a collision. Not debris. Something deliberate. Something fast and targeted, that came from 2 directions simultaneously, and hit the Saranath in its sensor array and its main engine nodes in the same second. The ship lurched. The lights went to emergency amber, and Mara Ellison was already on her feet and moving before I had fully processed what was happening. "Stay low," she said, "and stay close." She said it the way you say something you mean completely, with no space around the words for argument or delay. I stayed low, I stayed close. And then the Korath came aboard. I want to be accurate about what happened next. I want to be honest about what I saw and felt and understood, because the easy version of this story makes it sound clean and certain, and it was not clean. It was not certain at all. It was the most frightening 40 minutes of my life, and I have had some genuinely frightening minutes in 2 years of deep space research. The Korath came through the Saranath's secondary docking port, which they had forced open with a mechanical override tool designed specifically for Union standard airlocks. That was the first clear sign that these were not opportunists. Opportunists use improvised tools. They had purpose-built equipment for this specific type of entry, which meant they had prepared, which meant the distress beacon had been exactly what Mara said it was. I counted them as they moved the crew into the main hold. 11. They were a species I had read about, but never encountered directly. Humanoid, roughly, but larger and wider through the shoulders, with thick-plated skin that served as natural body armor, and a bone structure that made them dense and hard to move by force. They wore additional armor over the natural kind, and they carried weapons that I recognized as high-powered charge rods capable of delivering enough energy to stop most species' cardiac function in a single contact. They were efficient. They did not waste time threatening. They simply directed everyone to the hold, and the crew of the Saranath complied, because the standing Union protocol for this situation was explicit. Comply. Do not escalate. Preserve life. Let the Union's rapid response forces handle recovery and pursuit. It was a good protocol for most situations. Mara walked into the hold the same way she walked everywhere, with her hands visible, her posture easy, her face entirely neutral. A Korath followed 3 steps behind her, with a charge rod leveled at her back, and she appeared to pay it no more attention than she paid to a piece of furniture. They secured us, not physically restrained, but positioned in a space where 2 Korath with charge rods at the entrance made movement extremely unwise. Vreth was issuing quiet instructions to the crew, in a tone designed to keep everyone composed. The Kael'hari were experienced enough to know that panic made everything worse. Most of the crew was handling it. I was not entirely handling it. I was sitting with my back against the hold's inner wall and my hands resting on my knees and my heart doing something that did not feel healthy. I was running through outcomes. None of them were good. The Korath Syndicate was not known for harming crews that cooperated, but that reputation had exceptions, and exceptions were the part that worried me. Mara was sitting next to me, close enough that I could have reached out and touched her shoulder. She was not sitting the way I was sitting. I was sitting the way a person sits when they are frightened and trying not to look it. She was sitting the way a person sits when they are working. She was completely still, but it was not the stillness of someone frozen by fear. It was the stillness of someone who had decided that any movement at all was a waste of useful attention. Her eyes moved, slowly and continuously, around the hold, watching the Korath at the entrance, watching their posture, their footing, the angle of their bodies, watching the crew around us, watching the ceiling, the walls, the storage racks that ran along the left side of the hold. I had forgotten the storage racks. I had not once looked at the storage racks. She whispered to me, very quietly, the kind of quiet that does not carry past the distance between two people sitting close together. She told me there were 11 Korath on the ship. She told me she had seen 3 on her way to the hold and there were 2 at the entrance, and she was estimating the remainder were on the bridge, at the secondary access port, and at a minimum of 1 other crew location to prevent a coordinated response. She told me the Saranath's fire suppression foam, the chemical compound I had told her about 8 days ago, was stored in ceiling-mounted canisters in this hold and in 4 other locations on the ship, and that the Korath's respiratory system, based on published Union xenobiology records, processed oxygen through a different membrane structure than most species in the Union, which made certain chemical compounds significantly more disorienting to them than they would be to human lungs. She had asked me about the suppression foam 8 days ago. I had thought it was a reasonable question from someone learning a new ship. She had been filing it away. She had been building something in her head, quietly and continuously, from the moment she woke up on this ship. Not because she had known something like this was coming. Because she was the kind of person who, by long and serious training, and genuine deep belief, always knew where the exits were, and what was between her and them. She whispered one more thing to me. "When I move, you are going to want to watch," she said. "Don't. Watch the door instead. If anyone comes through it while I'm working, you tell me. That is the most useful thing you can do." "When you move," I repeated. "You're going to—" She looked at me, and something shifted in her eyes. Not coldness, not detachment, something that was the opposite of both of those things. Something focused and clear and deeply, completely awake. "Yes," she said. "I need you to trust me." I did not know her well enough to trust her. I had known her for 8 days. I had talked to her in a cargo bay at 3 in the morning, and cataloged samples with her, and listened to her ask very specific questions about ship systems. I did not have a logical basis for trust, but I said yes. The Korath at the entrance were not watching us closely. They were watching the larger alien crew members, who represented more obvious physical threat by almost any metric. 2 soft humans sitting against the far wall were not a concern. That was reasonable of them. That was also the mistake. Mara moved at 02:17 ship time. I was watching the door, as she had told me to. What I could see in my peripheral vision was a blur of motion that was faster and lower than I expected, and then one of the Korath at the entrance was down before the second one had processed that anything had happened. There was a sharp, short sound, not loud, and then the second one was also down. Then she was gone from the hold. The crew of the Saranath looked at each other, at the 2 Korath on the floor, at the empty space where Mara had been. Nobody moved for about 4 seconds. Then Vreth said something in Kalehari that my translator rendered as, "What just happened?" And nobody had an answer for that. I watched the door. I counted time in my head, because it was the only thing I could think to do that was useful. I counted 14 minutes. In 14 minutes, the ship went quiet. Not the quiet of waiting, the quiet of completion. Vreth was receiving real-time data from the ship's internal monitors, and I watched her face, which was difficult to read because Kalehari facial expressions were subtle, go through a sequence I had never seen on her before. Confusion was the first thing, then something I might have called disbelief. Then, very slowly, something that looked like a deep and thorough reconsideration of several things she had previously believed to be true. Mara came back to the hold and stood in the doorway. Her breathing was slightly elevated. There was a cut on her left side that had bled through her shirt. The fabric darkened in a wide spread below her ribs. She was holding a Korath charge rod in her right hand and a coolant line in her left, the latter pulled from what I later learned was a wall panel in the ship's mechanical corridor. Both items had been acquired during the 14 minutes she was gone. Neither of them had been in her hands when she left. She set them both down carefully on the floor beside the entrance. Then she sat down, pulled her shirt up enough to examine the cut on her side, and reached for the basic medical kit that was mounted on the hold wall, 3 feet from where she was sitting. She had known it was there. Of course she had. She had cataloged the location of every medical kit on the ship within her first 2 days aboard. She began treating the wound herself, methodically and calmly. The hold was completely silent. All of the alien crew, 14 of them, Kael'hari and Vel'hari and Drenthi, and species I had worked beside for 2 years, were staring at her. Not the way they had stared at her when she first came aboard, with detached curiosity. The way you stare at something when the category you had filed it in has ceased to exist, and you have no replacement category ready. I looked at Vreth. The 7-limbed captain of a vessel that had crossed 47 star systems was standing completely still, and all of her limbs, which normally moved in small, constant adjustments the way human hands fidget, were entirely motionless. Mara looked up and met Vreth's eyes. She did not say anything. She did not need to. She finished treating her side, pressed the sealing strip in place, and then asked, very practically, whether the ship's bridge was still accessible, and whether anyone had contacted Union Command about the incident yet. Vreth took a long moment to answer, a very long moment for a Kael'hari, whose cognitive processing speed was generally faster than most species in the Union. No, she said finally, not yet. You should do that, Mara said, and then she looked at me. Is there anything to eat? She asked. I stared at her. I started. I know, she said. I'm hungry. I found her something to eat. My hands were shaking the entire time. By the following morning, the Saranath had been in contact with Union Command. A Korath containment team was 6 hours out to collect the 11 individuals currently locked in the ship's secondary hold, and the alien crew of the research vessel had gone through a quiet, collective, and clearly thorough process of reconsidering several things they thought they knew. I watched it happen. It was one of the more remarkable things I had witnessed in 2 years aboard this ship, and I had witnessed some genuinely remarkable things. It did not look like a dramatic shift. It was not sudden or loud. It was the kind of change that happens when something you believe, something you have believed for a long time without questioning it much, quietly fails to match the evidence in front of you. When that happens to one intelligent person, they tend to think about it and adjust. When it happens to a crew of 14 simultaneously, the thinking mostly happens in private. People retreat into their routines and their workstations, and you can tell from the way they move around the ship and the way they look at certain things and the way they conspicuously do not start certain conversations that a reckoning is underway. Mara was unaware of all of this, or at least she appeared to be. She had slept her 8 hours in 2 4-hour blocks, eaten twice, and was sitting in the secondary observation deck that I had claimed as my primary workspace when I found her the next morning, looking out at the stars with the same calm attention she gave most things. I brought 2 cups of the hot liquid that the ship's nutrition system managed to produce that was close enough to coffee to call it that, and I sat down across from her. She took the cup. She did not say thank you, but she nodded, which from Mara I had come to understand was the same thing. How are you? I asked. She considered this question seriously, the way she considered all questions. Side is sore, she said. Everything else is fine. The medical system said you should rest it for at least 3 days, I said. The medical system is calibrated for Drenthi baseline healing rates, she said. I'll be fine in 2. She was right, as it happened. She was always right about her own body. It was one of the many things about her that I was still cataloging. You want to ask me things, she said. I always want to ask you things, I said. She looked at me, and something softened slightly in her expression. Not much, but enough to notice. Ask, she said. I thought about which question to start with. There were many candidates. I chose the one that had been sitting at the front of my mind since 0217 the previous night. How did you know what to do? I asked. Not just the technical parts. The whole of it. How did you know you could do it? She was quiet for a moment, not thinking about whether to answer, thinking about how to answer accurately. Do you know what ranger selection involves? She said. Some, I said. I know it's long. I know the failure rate is high. The first phase is 18 months, she said. Physical and technical. You learn everything that has ever been documented about surviving difficult environments. Every terrain type, every climate, every species of terrain animal that might want to resolve the situation by removing you from it. Every plant chemistry, every weather pattern, every geological risk. All of it. You become, in a very literal sense, an expert in everything that has ever tried to remove humans from difficult places. She sipped from the cup. The second phase is psychological, she said. Which is harder. You learn to manage fear without suppressing it. Because fear is information, and suppressing information is how people get killed. You learn to process a situation while you are afraid of it, and make good decisions anyway. You learn what happens to your body when it floods with stress chemicals, and you learn to use that state rather than be overwhelmed by it. And then there's the week with nothing, I said, remembering what she had told me in the cargo bay. That comes at the end, she said, after 2.5 years of the other things. By then you already know who you are. The week is just confirmation. I looked at her, at the clear, settled quality in her eyes that I had noticed from the first moment they opened. That was not a quality that had arrived easily. That was a quality that had been built, deliberately and at considerable cost, over years. Can I ask you something else? I said. Yes. The cost of it, I said carefully. The training and everything that came after. What does it take from you? She was quiet for longer this time. Outside the viewport, the debris field we had been surveying drifted past in slow, patient rotation. I don't sleep in one stretch, she said. Most people don't notice. 4 hours. Wake up. Assess. 4 more hours. I have done that since year 1 of selection, and I expect I will do it until I am very old. She looked down at the cup in her hands. I always know where the exits are, she said. Always. In every room I enter. I cannot turn it off. I have tried. Somewhere around year 3 I stopped trying, and started calling it a feature instead of a problem. She paused. Meals are difficult, she said. Not the eating, the sitting. The sitting with my back to a space I have not checked. I have to choose, every time I sit down to eat, whether to check first or just sit and accept the discomfort. Usually I check. Occasionally I practice not checking. It is a work in progress. She said all of this in the same tone she said everything. Level and clear and without complaint. But I heard the weight of it. Not weight that she was carrying badly. Weight that she was carrying well, which is a different thing and in some ways a harder one. Carrying something badly, you can put it down when it becomes too much. Carrying something well, you do not put it down. You just get stronger. You adjust. You keep going. Vraith wants to talk to you, I said. Mara raised an eyebrow very slightly. She came and found me this morning, I said. Early, before I came here. She said she wanted to request a conversation. A request, Mara said. That was the word she used. Yes. Mara was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded. Okay, she said. I arranged it for that afternoon. Vreth's meeting room, which was a space I had been into perhaps 3 times in 2 years because Vreth was not a creature who invited casual visitors. She was there when we arrived. All 7 limbs arranged in the formal resting position that Kael'hari used for situations they considered significant. She looked at Mara for a long moment. There was something in her expression that I genuinely struggled to name. Vreth had, in the time I had known her, been composed and authoritative and occasionally and briefly warm, but she had never looked uncertain. She looked, right now, as close to uncertain as I had ever seen her. "I want to understand," Vreth said. "What you did, how you did it. I want to understand it factually, because the security assessment I submitted to Union Command requires an accurate account, and what I observed does not fit any parameter I have for describing an individual crew member's response to a hostile boarding event." Mara looked at her calmly. "What specifically do you need to know?" she said. "You incapacitated 11 armed Korath operatives in 14 minutes, Vreth said. Alone, without pre-issued equipment, with a wound already in progress. The wound happened during, Mara said, not before, and the equipment was available in the ship. I had located it in advance." "You had located it in advance," Vreth repeated. "I always locate things in advance," Mara said. Vreth was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Is this a human ability? What you demonstrated, is it something your species is capable of as a general property, or is it something specific to you?" Mara thought about this. It was the same kind of serious, accurate consideration she gave to every question. "Most humans never have to find out what they are capable of," she said. "They live on a planet that has been, in the last few centuries, significantly safer than it used to be. They eat food that comes from organized systems. They do not encounter the things that shaped us. They are the same species as me, with the same fundamental architecture. But they have not had reason to access all of it." She paused. "Think of it like this," she said. "Earth, the planet I come from, has been producing complex life for 4 billion years. Almost all of that life was in competition with everything around it, constantly. The things that survived were the things that were very good at surviving, the things that could adapt to almost any condition, the things that could take damage and continue functioning, the things that could learn, quickly, what was trying to remove them from the situation, and find a way to remain in the situation anyway." She held Vreth's gaze. "We are descended from all of those things," she said. "Every one of them. We carry all of it. Most of us do not need it most of the time, but it does not go away." Vreth did not speak for a long moment. "I called you soft," she said finally, "when Griffith brought you aboard." "I know," Mara said. "I was incorrect," Vreth said. "You were working from incomplete information," Mara said. "It was not an absolution. It was not a dismissal either. It was just an accurate statement, delivered without cruelty and without comfort." Vreth unfolded 2 of her limbs, the ones closest to the position of hands in Kalahari posture, and placed them flat on the table between them. It was a gesture I had never seen her make before. I looked it up later in my Kalahari cultural references. It was a gesture of formal acknowledgement, used, historically, when a Kalahari leader recognized that they had misjudged the nature of an ally. "You will be treated as full crew for the remainder of this voyage," Vreth said. "Both of you." Mara nodded once. Then she asked whether her quarters could be moved to a room with a viewport, and Vreth said yes, and that was the end of the meeting. Sivith did not apologize. Sivith was Velhari, and Velhari do not apologize as a cultural matter. But it stopped making sounds that corresponded to amusement when humans were present. It also, over the following days, began addressing questions to Mara in the technical briefings. Small ones at first, then more substantive ones. Mara answered them all with the same directness she brought to everything, and Sivith listened in a way that it had not listened to either of us before. The other crew members adjusted in their own ways. None of them made speeches about it, but the small, consistent behaviors of dismissal that I had lived with for 2 years gradually disappeared. The polite condescension, the mild amusement at the idea that a human opinion might carry weight, the way they spoke over us in briefings as if we had not spoken. All of it simply stopped, one interaction at a time, as if each crew member was privately working through a recalculation and arriving, quietly, at a different conclusion. I did not feel triumphant about this. I felt something more complicated, because the recalculation had happened because of something that had been very dangerous and frightening, and I was aware that the respect we were now being given was edged with something that was not entirely comfortable. They were not afraid of Mara in the simple way of people afraid of something that might hurt them. It was more specific than that. They were afraid, in the way you are afraid, when you realize that the map you have been using to navigate a place is wrong, when the territory turns out to be different from the picture, when you understand that your confidence in your own understanding was built on an assumption that has now been quietly and completely dismantled. They were afraid of being wrong again. Mara and I talked about it on the fourth evening after the boarding event, sitting in her new quarters with the viewport behind her, filling the room with starlight. They look at you differently, I said. They look at both of us differently, she said. It started with you, I said. It started with them, she said. It started with the choice they made about what we were before they had enough information to decide. What happened was just the information arriving. She was right. She was usually right. It was occasionally maddening and mostly just clarifying. What happens when you get to wherever you're going next? I asked. Your next assignment. She looked at the stars for a moment. I go back to doing what I do, she said. Wherever they need it done. Doesn't it cost you? I said. Being deployed that far from everyone. Alone. She looked at me then, and for a moment, the steadiness in her expression was not a performance and not a strategy. It was just true. Yes, she said. It does. She did not explain further, and I did not ask her to. Some things do not need to be expanded. They just need to be acknowledged. We sat in companionable quiet for a while, and outside the viewport the stars were old and cold and enormous, and I thought about what she had said to Vreth, about 4 billion years of things that refused to die, about carrying it, about most people not knowing it was there because they had never needed to look. I thought about how long I had been on this ship feeling like the smallest thing aboard it. I thought about how that had felt so natural that I had stopped questioning it. The Union inquiry began 6 days after the Korath incident. I had expected this. The Union ran formal assessments of all significant events involving crew safety, and 11 armed Korath operatives being neutralized by a single unarmed human during a boarding of a research vessel was, by any reasonable measure, a significant event. What I had not expected was the scale of the inquiry. They sent 3 assessment officers and a xenobiological specialist, and a behavior analyst, and a Union military consultant. 6 people, which was more than they had sent when an entire survey fleet had been lost to a gravitational anomaly 3 years prior. They set up in the ship's main conference room and worked in shifts. The first 2 days, they reviewed the data. The ship's internal monitors had recorded the 14 minutes at full resolution. I had watched the recording once, the night before the assessment team arrived, because I wanted to understand what I had been too focused on the door to see directly. I watched it once. I did not watch it again. Not because it was horrifying. It was not. Not in the way I feared. It was efficient and purposeful and controlled. But it was also deeply, uncomplicatedly real. And reality at that intensity needs some distance before it can be processed properly. Mara was assessed on the 3rd day. I was not present in the room, but I sat outside and I could hear, faintly, the questions and the answers. The behavior analyst asked about her emotional state during the incident. She said, collected. He asked what she had felt. She said, useful. He asked whether she had experienced fear. She was quiet for a moment and then said, yes, at the beginning, which is appropriate, and after that I was occupied with other things. The military consultant asked about her tactical choices. She walked through each one with the patience of someone who had explained technical processes to people unfamiliar with them many times before. The coolant line had been accessible because she had located it 3 days prior. The specific approach to each of the 11 had accounted for their individual positions, natural body armor distribution, and the weapon handling behaviors she had observed during the boarding. She had prioritized the 2 with the best sightlines to the hold first. The consultant asked her how long it had taken to formulate the plan. She said she had begun formulating it when she first identified the distress beacon as a likely trap. He asked her to clarify. She said she had not known for certain it was a trap. She had assigned it a high probability and begun planning on that basis. She said that planning for high-probability scenarios before they became certain was one of the foundational skills of her training, and one of the reasons the training took as long as it did. There was a pause in the questions after that. The kind of pause that means the people in the room are looking at each other. On the 5th day of the inquiry, the team asked to assess me as well. I sat across from the xenobiological specialist, a Thalari woman named Jexon, who had the quiet, attentive quality of someone who had spent a long career being interested in things other people overlooked, and I answered her questions as precisely as I could. She asked me about living as the only human aboard a multi-species vessel for 2 years. I told her it had been an education in what it felt like to be the least regarded person in any room. She asked whether I found that difficult. I said yes. She asked whether it had changed how I saw myself. I said it had for a while, and then Mara arrived and it changed again. She asked me to describe Mara, not the incident, just Mara, as I had come to know her. I sat with that for a moment. She is the most present person I have ever met, I said finally. Not present like she demands attention, present like she is completely in the place she is. She is entirely here, whatever here is, and she is paying complete attention to it, and there is no part of her energy going somewhere else. Jexon was writing something. She is also one of the only people I have ever met, I said, who is genuinely kind without making any performance of it. She does not announce her consideration for other people. She just considers them. It shows up in small ways. She remembers what I tell her. She asks about things that I mentioned once in passing. She made sure, the morning after the incident, to find every crew member individually and confirm they were all right. Jexon looked up at me. Every one of them? She said. Every one, I said. 14 people, including the ones who had been unkind to her. The assessment team filed their report on the 7th day. I was not given a copy of it. Mara was, because it pertained directly to her, and she read it and set it down and said, in the way she said, when she found something accurate but not particularly surprising. What did it say? I asked. Recommended reclassification of human crew deployment guidelines, she said, pending further research. What does that mean in practice? It means they are going to think about us differently, she said, for a while. 3 days after the assessment team departed, the Galactic Union issued a system-wide advisory. I saw it on the ship's newsfeed that morning while I was at my workstation. It was brief and technical, and written in the careful language that Union official documents always used, which meant it sounded much calmer than the thing it was actually saying. Earth had been reclassified, effective immediately. Former designation: Class 3 Biosphere, manageable complexity, limited external threat generation. New designation: Class 7 Biosphere, extreme adaptation origin, high-functioning survival capability. Crew requiring informed awareness in all operational contexts. It was 7 lines of text. It was also, in the 250 years since humanity had joined the Galactic Union, the largest single upward reclassification of Earth status in the Union's official record. I showed it to Mara. She read it twice, and then set my tablet down and drank her coffee substitute in thoughtful silence. How do you feel about it? I asked. It's accurate, she said, which is what matters. It's more than accurate, I said. It's the Union telling the galaxy that they were wrong about us. She looked at me. No, she said. It's the Union telling the galaxy that they had incomplete data. That's a different thing. Wrong means they should have known better. Incomplete means they didn't have enough to know at all. She handed me back my tablet. Don't be angry at them for not knowing what we are, she said. Just make sure they know it now. I thought about that for a long time after she said it. I thought about all the small indignities of 2 years as the soft one, the curious specimen, the mammal who had wandered into space. I thought about how easy it would be to want credit for the correction, to want the acknowledgement to feel like justice. But she was right. Again. She had a way of being right that did not feel like a small thing even when she said it quietly. Mara received her new assignment 2 weeks after the inquiry closed. She came and told me in person, which I appreciated. She had been offered a position on a joint Union-Human deep terrain team operating in a part of the galaxy where several species were in conflict over resource access, and the Union needed people who were very good at working in places where conditions were hostile and the margin for error was minimal. It was exactly the kind of work she was built for. She was leaving in 3 days. We spent those 3 days working together in my lab, which had become normal for us by then. She asked questions that pushed my thinking in directions I had not gone before. I gave her books on xenobiology to read on her next posting. She read 2 of them in a day and returned them with handwritten notes in the margins. On the morning she left, she found me in the lab. She did not knock because knocking implied uncertainty about whether to come in, and Mara did not have that kind of uncertainty. She stood across the workstation from me and reached into her pocket and took out a small object. She set it on the table between us. It was a piece of folded paper, white and precise, folded into the form of a small crane. I knew what it was. Origami is one of the oldest human art forms, and the crane is one of its oldest subjects, a symbol of something that endures. She had made it by hand, with nothing but paper and patience. "Don't let them forget what we are," she said. "Either of us." I picked up the crane. It was very light. Each fold was exact. I looked up and she was already turning to go, and I did not say anything, because there was nothing that needed to be said that was not already contained in the small, precise, entirely human thing she had left on my workstation. She left the ship at 0800. I watched the departure on the docking monitor. Later that afternoon, Sivith came to my lab. It stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at the crane on my desk, and then at me. "She is gone," it said. "Yes," I said. Sivith was quiet for a moment. Then it said something I had never heard it say in 2 years. It said, "I misjudged." It did not wait for a response. It turned and left. I sat at my workstation with the paper crane in front of me, and the stars filling the viewport behind me. And I thought about something Mara had said to me in the very first conversation we'd had in the cargo bay. About the question the Ranger training was designed to answer. When everything else is gone, who are you? I had thought of it as her question, something specific to her path and her choices. But sitting in that lab with the crane and the stars, I understood that it was my question too. It was every human's question, whether we ever found an occasion to answer it or not. Whether we found ourselves in a cargo bay at 3 in the morning, or a debris field alone, or a research vessel full of species who were still learning what we were. Out there, beyond the viewport, the galaxy was old and vast, and full of species that had been moving through it for longer than our planet had been solid. Many of them had looked at us and seen something small, something manageable, something that could be accommodated in the margins. They were learning that the margins were deceptive. We did not come from a comfortable world. We came from a world that had spent 4 billion years producing things that could adapt to almost anything, survive almost anything, endure almost anything, and then get up and try again. We carried that with us into space, the same way we carried our language and our music and our paper cranes. It was not something we had chosen. It was something we were. Mara was the version of it that had been trained and honed and made explicit. The rest of us were the version that kept it quietly, in reserve, in case the moment arrived when it was needed. I was starting to think the galaxy should know that. I opened my research log and I began to write. Not a xenobiological paper, not a crew report, something different. Something about what it meant to be human in a universe that had decided in advance what we were worth. About how that decision had been made without adequate information. About a woman who had been drifting in the dark for 20 days, and had kept herself organized and alive and ready, without anyone to tell her it was worth it. About what we carry, all of us. I wrote for a long time. The stars moved slowly past the viewport. The ship hummed around me. 14 species going about their routines, doing the work of cataloging a universe that was larger than any of them, and did not care about any of them, and was nevertheless worth the effort. I held the paper crane in my hand and I wrote. Outside, the galaxy stretched in every direction, vast and cold and full of things that thought they had us figured out. I thought, not even close. Not even close. End.